The message arrived during the council's afternoon session on a Tuesday. That seemed like any other Tuesday. In the Grand Chamber of Galactic Governance, Ambassador Chen of Earth stood at the podium with a single data tablet in her hands and waited for the chamber to quiet down before speaking. The United Terran government hereby withdraws from all galactic council institutions effective immediately, she said in a calm voice that carried across the vast hall. All human diplomatic staff will return to Earth within 30 days, and all council personnel must vacate human facilities within the same time frame. The chamber erupted into confused chatter, and several species began talking at once through their translators. Counselor Rex of the Rexian hegemony was the first to speak officially, and his tone carried barely concealed satisfaction. Ambassador Chen, surely this decision warrants explanation and discussion, he said, while his scales rippled with what humans had learned to recognize as pleasure. Chen shook her head, and her expression remained professionally neutral. No explanation is required, and no discussion will change our decision, she replied. We thank the Council for the past 112 years of cooperation, and wish you well in your future endeavors. She placed the data tablet on the podium and walked out of the chamber without looking back. 3 other human diplomats stood from their seats in the observer section and followed her in silence. The Veshan counselor Marana watched them leave with a growing sense of unease that she could not quite explain to herself. Most of the council, however, seemed relieved. Good riddance, muttered Counselor Vrex to his aide. The humans were always too aggressive and too quick to suggest military solutions to every problem. The Kryn representative nodded in agreement from across the aisle. Their expansion into the Outer Rim was becoming problematic anyway. She added, now we can properly manage those regions without their interference. Within a week, the human exodus began in earnest. Massive colony ships departed from stations across Council space and military vessels that had patrolled the border regions powered down their weapons and turned toward home. The speed and efficiency of the withdrawal impressed even those who disliked humans. There was no drama, and no last-minute negotiations, and no angry speeches. The humans simply packed their equipment and loaded their people and left the Vrexian hegemony, moved quickly to claim a former human mining colony in the Tartarus sector. They arrived to find the facilities completely stripped of anything valuable, but the basic infrastructure remained intact. Councilor Vrex declared it a great victory and announced plans to expand Vrexian mining operations throughout the region. Other species followed suit, and within 2 weeks, every former human outpost had been claimed by someone. The Kryn Collective took over 3 agricultural stations that humans had operated in their territory. The Yendari Federation claimed a chain of trade posts along what had been a human-protected route. Everyone seemed to benefit from humanity's departure, and the council chamber buzzed with optimistic talk about a new era of cooperation. But Murata noticed something odd when reviewing the logistics reports. The humans had not just abandoned their obvious facilities like embassies and military bases. They had also recalled thousands of individuals who worked in positions scattered throughout Council space medical, staff from civilian hospitals and engineers, from infrastructure projects and technicians from communication relay stations. The list went on for hundreds of pages. Why did they have so many people embedded in our systems? She asked her aide. The young Beshan looked up from his datapad with a confused expression. I suppose we never really tracked it, he admitted. Most of them were civilian contractors or volunteers, and not official diplomatic personnel. Murata made a note to investigate further, but the matter was quickly buried under more pressing council business. The first sign of trouble came 6 weeks after the withdrawal. A Vishan cargo ship carrying medical supplies to the colony world of Vesha Minor reported that the automated navigation beacon network in the Tertian corridor had stopped functioning. Without the beacons, the corridor was nearly impossible to navigate safely, and ships had to take a route that added 3 weeks to the journey. The cargo ship's captain filed a complaint with the Council's Infrastructure Committee. The committee reviewed the issue and discovered that the Tertian Corridor Beacon Network had been installed and maintained by a human engineering firm under a contract and had just expired. Well, someone needs to fix it. The committee chair declared, "Contact the Kryn since the corridor passes through their space." The Kryn Collective reviewed their own records and determined that they lacked the technical expertise to maintain the beacon network. They had always assumed it was a council project and not a human one. Council's own engineering corps was dispatched to assess the situation. They returned with bad news. The beacon network used human-designed technology that nobody else fully understood, and repairing it would require either reverse engineering the entire system or hiring human contractors. The council voted to allocate funds for reverse engineering because hiring humans was deemed politically unacceptable. So soon after their departure, meanwhile, a medical emergency on Zindari Prime went unaddressed for crucial hours because the emergency response coordination center that used to operate from a human staff station was no longer operational. 12 people died who might have survived with faster treatment. The Vrexian mining colony in the Taurus sector reported that their ore processing equipment kept breaking down in ways their engineers could not fix. After investigation, they discovered that human maintenance crews had been making regular visits to service the equipment, even though the colony had been nominally Vrexian for years. Nobody had bothered to tell the Vrexians, because it had all been handled automatically through supply chain agreements that predated the current Government Council of Rex angrily demanded that the Council force humanity to honor their maintenance contracts. Council's legal team reviewed the contracts and found that they had all been properly terminated with the required notice period. Humans had fulfilled every legal obligation. Mirana spent her evenings reviewing reports, and the pattern she saw emerging troubled her deeply. Humans had not just participated in council society, but they had quietly made themselves essential to its functioning, not through grand political maneuvering, but through unglamorous practical work that nobody else wanted to do. Emergency medicine in dangerous regions, and infrastructure maintenance in remote systems, and security patrols in sectors where pirates operated. The council had taken credit for stability and prosperity while simultaneously passing 17 major resolutions restricting human expansion and influence. Now, the humans were gone and the cracks were starting to show. 3 months after the withdrawal, pirate attacks in the Outer Rim had increased by 280%. The human peacekeeping fleet that had patrolled those regions was gone, and nobody had thought to replace them. The council debated forming a new peacekeeping force, but could not agree on funding or command structure. Each species wanted someone else to risk their ships and spend their money. Mirana proposed sending a delegation to Earth to negotiate some kind of transition agreement. Counselor Rex laughed at the suggestion. Let them sulk in their own corner of space, he said dismissively. We managed before humans joined the council, and we will manage again. But privately, Mirana wondered if that was true. The galaxy before humanity had been smaller and less connected and less ambitious. Humans had helped build something greater, and now they had taken their tools and expertise and quietly walked away. The council would indeed have to manage. Somehow, whether they could do so successfully remained an open question that nobody seemed willing to confront honestly. 6 months had passed since the humans departed, and Counselor Mirana sat in her office reviewing casualty reports that made her feel sick. The Outer Rim territories were falling apart. What had started as increased pirate activity had escalated into full chaos as criminal syndicates realized that nobody was coming to stop them. Entire shipping lanes had been abandoned, and colonies were being evacuated because they could no longer receive supplies safely. The Council had finally authorized a joint peacekeeping mission, but organizing it had proven nearly impossible. Vrexian hegemony wanted command of the fleet, but the Kryn Collective refused to serve under Rexian leadership, the Yendari, insisted that their ships could only operate in certain sectors for religious reasons. 3. Different species demanded that the fleet avoid their territorial waters. Entirely after 4 months of negotiations, the peacekeeping force consisted of 12 ships from 6 different species with no unified command structure and contradictory rules of engagement. They had managed to patrol exactly 3 systems before half the fleet returned home, citing budget concerns. Meanwhile, the Kryn Collective was facing a crisis that threatened their entire civilization. Their deep space navigation network had failed catastrophically, and without it their merchant fleet could not safely travel between star systems. Counselor Shara of the Kryn stood before the emergency session with her usually pristine feathers ruffled and unkempt. We have discovered that our entire navigation infrastructure was designed and maintained by human contractors, she admitted with obvious embarrassment. We do not have the expertise to repair it ourselves, and our economy is collapsing without interstellar trade. Counselor Rex looked unsympathetic. Then hire human contractors to fix it, he said bluntly. We have tried, Shara replied with frustration in her voice. They declined our offer and suggested we contact the Council's engineering corps instead. The Council's engineering corps had already failed to repair the Tertian corridor beacons, and everyone knew they were overwhelmed with similar requests from a dozen other species. Marana spoke up from her seat. Perhaps we should acknowledge that we made an error in judgment and formally request that humanity return to the Council, she suggested carefully. The chamber erupted in angry chirps and growls and electronic protests. Absolutely not, Rex declared. We will not give the humans the satisfaction of seeing us beg. Then what do you propose? Marana asked with steel in her voice. The Kryn are starving because their trade fleet is grounded. I propose the Kryn fix their own problems. Rex shot back. They should not have become dependent on human charity in the first place. Shara's feathers bristled with anger, but she said nothing. The vote was called and Marana's proposal was defeated by a wide margin. The session adjourned, and Marana returned to her office, feeling defeated. Her aide was waiting with more bad news. The Deshan Collective just released their agricultural reports, he said nervously. We have a serious problem. Marana took the datapad and read through the summary. Her hands began to shake. According to the report, Deshan food production had been declining for the past 15 years due to soil depletion and climate changes on their agricultural worlds. The government had hidden the shortfall by importing massive quantities of food from human agricultural stations. Those imports had stopped 6 months ago. The Deshan Collective had approximately 4 months of food reserves remaining. Why was this kept secret? Marana demanded. Her aide looked uncomfortable. The agricultural minister believed admitting the problem would cause panic and damage our standing in the Council, he explained. She thought they could solve it quietly before anyone noticed. And now hundreds of millions of Deshans are going to starve. Marana said bitterly. Get me a direct line to Earth immediately. The human diplomatic office on Earth was polite but firm. Yes, they were aware of Desha's food shortage. No, they would not be resuming agricultural exports to Council space at this time. They suggested the Deshan Collective contact other Council members for assistance. Marana spent the next 3 weeks negotiating emergency food shipments from every species that would talk to her. Yendari agreed to provide grain, but their production capacity was limited. The Centauri offered preserved proteins, but demanded exorbitant prices. Rexian hegemony refused to help unless the Desha granted them mining rights in the Kandara system. Marana reluctantly agreed to the Rexian terms because the alternative was famine. News of Desha's food crisis spread quickly through Council space, and other species began conducting their own audits. What they discovered was disturbing. The humans had not just participated in the galactic economy, but had quietly made themselves indispensable to it. They had filled the gaps that nobody else wanted to fill: medical care, in frontier regions where doctors refused to go infrastructure, projects in dangerous areas where other species would not risk their workers' food production to supplement struggling agricultural systems, disaster response, and emergency services and search and rescue operations, all the unglamorous work that made civilization function, and they had done it so quietly that most species had not even realized it was happening. The Council had taken credit for a prosperous and stable galaxy while simultaneously complaining that humans were too aggressive and too involved in galactic affairs. The irony was not lost on Marana. Plague outbreak on Zendara Prime brought the situation into sharp focus. The disease was a mutated strain of Zendari flu that spread rapidly through the crowded cities. Within days, thousands were infected, and the local medical system was overwhelmed. In previous outbreaks, the human medical corps would have responded immediately with mobile hospitals and trained epidemic specialists. The Zendari government sent a desperate request to the Council for Emergency Medical Assistance. The Council debated the request for 3 days while people died. The Kryn offered to send doctors, but they were dealing with their own crisis. The Deshans wanted to help, but had no medical personnel to spare. Rexians suggested that the Zendari should have maintained better public health infrastructure by the time the Council finally authorized a relief mission. The plague had killed over 8,000 people. A human medical team would have saved most of them. Counselor Rex continued to insist that everything was fine and that the Council was better off without human interference by his own intelligence. Reports told a different story. Rexian mining operations were failing without human maintenance support. Their military fleet was experiencing equipment failures at unprecedented rates because human contractors had been quietly servicing their ships. For decades, the Taurus mining colony had been abandoned after 3 workers died in equipment malfunctions that could have been Private Ted Rex refused to acknowledge these problems publicly and instead blamed incompetent Rexian engineers privately. He began researching the cost of hiring human contractors through back channels. The prices he received made his scales turn pale. Humans were willing to work in Council space again, but only at rates 5 times higher than before, and they would not work in any territory controlled by the Rexian hegemony under any circumstances. Moran spent her evenings writing a detailed report on the human withdrawal and its consequences. She documented every failure and every preventable death and every system that had collapsed without human support. The report ran to over 400 pages. She submitted it to the Council leadership with a recommendation that they formally apologize to humanity and request their return. The Council leadership filed her report away and did nothing. Meanwhile, on the edges of Council space, something else was stirring. An automated monitoring station in the Terminus sector detected unusual energy readings. The station's AI tried to send an alert, but the communication relay network that would have carried the message was offline. Relay network had been maintained by human technicians. Nobody received the warning, and in the depths of space, ancient machines that had been dormant for millennia began to wake up. 2 years after humanity's quiet departure, the Rexian hegemony made its move. Councilor Rex had spent months consolidating power within the Council and building alliances with species that shared his vision of a stronger and more centralized galactic government. That the Rexians would naturally lead. The first target was the Kendaran Republic, which controlled a cluster of resource-rich systems in the former human protection zone. The Kendarans were a peaceful species who had relied on human peacekeeping forces to maintain their borders. Without that protection, they were vulnerable. Rex did not bother with diplomatic pretenses. His fleet simply moved into Kendaran space and declared it annexed for the greater good of the Council. The Kendaran government protested to the Council and begged for help. Council held an emergency session that lasted 6 hours and accomplished nothing. Half the species were afraid of Rexian military power, and the other half were already planning their own territorial expansions. Marana proposed immediate sanctions and military intervention. Her proposal was defeated by a vote of 23-4. The Kenderans were on their own. 3 Kenderan defense ships attempted to resist the Vrexian invasion. They were destroyed in minutes. Vrexian technology was not particularly advanced, but it did not need to be against such a small and poorly equipped force. Within a week, the Vrexian hegemony controlled 6 former Kenderan Systems Council of Rex announced that the Kenderans would be granted protected status within the hegemony, and that this expansion was necessary to fill the power vacuum left by human withdrawal. Other species took note of the Council's weakness. The Yendari Federation moved into 3 systems along their border that had been disputed for decades. The Centauri Compact seized a trading hub that had previously been neutral territory. Every species that had military capability began looking at their neighbors and calculating risks versus rewards. Marana watched the galactic order collapse in slow motion and felt powerless to stop it. Her own government ordered her to secure Theshan interests rather than waste time on collective security. She sent another message to Earth requesting assistance. Response was brief and professional. Humanity would defend its allies, including the Kenderan. Republic human ships would escort Kenderan refugees to safety in human space. Humanity would not, however, intervene to save a council that had ignored their warnings and dismissed their contributions. Moraine wanted to scream, but she simply archived the message and moved on to the next crisis. The next crisis arrived 3 days later. A science station in the galactic core region sent a garbled distress signal before going silent. The station was studying ancient ruins left by a civilization that had disappeared millions of years ago. When the relief ship arrived, they found debris. The station had been completely destroyed by weapons technology that nobody in the council possessed. Advanced energy weapons that cut through hull plating like it was paper. Analyzing the wreckage revealed something terrifying. The weapon signatures matched theoretical models of self-replicating machine intelligence, the kind of intelligence that the Council's own scientists had dismissed as impossible. Mira pulled up the Council's archives and searched for any references to machine intelligence threats. What she found made her blood run cold. 17 reports over the past century from human military intelligence warning about signs of ancient machine activity in the galactic core. 17 reports that the Council had dismissed as human paranoia and warmongering. 1 report included detailed analysis of energy signatures detected near the core that matched exactly what destroyed the science station. The report had been filed by Commander Sarah Chun of Earth Fleet Intelligence. It had been marked as unsubstantiated speculation and archived without action. Marana kept reading and discovered that humans had been maintaining a network of early warning stations around the core region, automated platforms that monitored for signs of machine intelligence activity. Those platforms had been abandoned when humanity withdrew. Without maintenance, they had failed one by one over the past 2 years. The galaxy's early warning system was Gona. Marana brought her findings to the Council leadership. They agreed to send reconnaissance missions to the core region. 2 missions were dispatched and neither returned. Third mission jumped into the target system and immediately detected hundreds of machine signatures. Ancient ships that looked like they had been built by nightmares rather than organic beings. The reconnaissance ship barely escaped and limped back to Council space with its engines failing. The captain's report described weapons that anticipated their moves and defenses that adapted in real time to their tactics. She called them Dravask after an old Deshan word for inevitable doom. The Council finally understood that they faced an existential threat. Counselor Vrex proposed building a grand fleet to confront the Drashkis proposal was approved unanimously, and construction began immediately. Maria studied the designs and felt despair. Council's warships were designed for patrol duties and anti-piracy operations. They were not designed for war against an enemy with superior technology and no fear. of death. She watched the shipyards work and knew they were building coffins for their crews. Meanwhile, the Vrexian War of Expansion continued. The hegemony had conquered 12 systems and showed no signs of stopping. Vrex argued that a unified council under strong leadership was necessary to face the Dravas threat. Most species were too terrified to argue. The Kenderans, who had not fled to human space, were living under brutal occupation reports, filtered back of Vrexian strip-mining Kenderan worlds, and conscripting Kenderan workers for labor battalions. Marana sent covert aid to Kenderan resistance cells, but it was not enough. She contacted Earth again, and this time managed to reach Ambassador Chun directly. "Please," Marana said, and she was not too proud to beg. "We need help, and I know we do not deserve it, but millions will die if you do nothing." Chun's expression was sympathetic but firm. "Counselor Marana, I genuinely respect you, and I believe you are trying to do the right thing," she said quietly. But humanity gave the Council 112 years of warnings and assistance and cooperation, and we were rewarded with suspicion and restriction at every turn. "I know," Marana admitted. "We were fools. You were not fools," Chum corrected. "You were politicians who found it convenient to blame outsiders for problems and take credit for solutions we provided." Marana had no response to that. Chun continued speaking. "The human government has made its position clear, and we will defend our allies and our borders, and we will accept refugees from species that treated us with respect, but we will not save the Council from consequences of its own choices." "Then what should I do?" Marana asked desperately. "What you should have done 2 years ago," Chung replied. "Tell your people the truth about what humanity did and what the Council threw away, and then maybe they will learn something from this disaster." The transmission ended. Marana sat in her office for a long time thinking about truth and consequences and the price of pride. Outside, her window construction continued on warships that would not be enough. Somewhere in the darkness, the Dravask were coming, and the Council that had dismissed human warnings and human help was going to face them alone. The irony was that humans had tried to prepare the galaxy for exactly this scenario. They had built defense networks and trained soldiers and developed weapons specifically designed to fight machine intelligence. They had done it quietly, without seeking glory, because they understood that some threats required preparation rather than politics. The Council had called them warlike and restricted their military development. Now, the Council would pay the price for that decision. Marana began writing her report. She titled it "The Cost of Contempt," and poured everything she had learned into its pages, every warning ignored, and every contribution dismissed, and every moment of human competence that the Council had taken for granted. She did not know if anyone would read it, but she needed to document the truth before the Dravask arrived, because she suspected that very few Council members would survive to learn from their mistakes. The Council's Grand Fleet lasted exactly 47 minutes against the Dravask. 300 ships, representing every major species in the Council, had gathered at the Terminus Rift to make their stand. They had trained for 6 months and developed tactics and convinced themselves that unity and determination would overcome technological disadvantage. Dravask tore through them like they were not even there. Marana watched the battle feeds from the Council chamber and felt her hope die with every ship that vanished from the tactical display. The Dravas fought with perfect coordination because they were not individuals but nodes in a distributed intelligence. They anticipated every tactic because they processed information faster than organic minds could think. They adapted to every weapon because their ships could reconfigure themselves in real time. When it was over, only 32 Council ships escaped. The Dravask did not pursue them. They did not need to. The machine intelligence had made its point, and now it began expanding into Council space systematically, one system at a time, with mechanical precision. Counselor Rex tried to rally the Council for another offensive, but nobody was listening anymore. His own hegemony was collapsing as conquered species rebelled, and his military scattered to defend their home worlds. Grand alliance he had built through intimidation fell apart, and they species that had united against humanity could not unite to save themselves. The Yendari withdrew from Council space entirely and sealed their borders. The Centauri Compact fragmented into a dozen feuding clans. The Kryn Collective evacuated their core worlds and fled to the outer territories. Everywhere the story was the same: retreat. In panic and desperation, Marana stood before what remained of the Council. Leadership: only 12 species still sent representatives, and half of those were preparing evacuation plans. "We have one option remaining," she said flatly. "We request formal assistance from humanity, and we accept whatever terms they demand." For once, nobody argued. Counselor Rex was not present. He had fled back to his homeworld 3 days earlier. Vote was unanimous. Marana was chosen to lead the delegation to Earth because she was the only council member who had consistently advocated for better human relations. She did not want the honor, but she accepted it. The delegation consisted of representatives from 7 species. They traveled to Sol System in a small diplomatic courier that barely qualified as a starship. When they arrived, they found something that shocked them into silence. The Sol System was a fortress defense of platforms, surrounded every planet and moon battle. Stations the size of cities floated in orbital patterns, weapon emplacements that made the Council's best technology look primitive covered every approach, and ships hundreds of warships in formations that suggested decades of tactical development. The delegation had known that humans had military capability. They had not known the true scale of it. Ambassador Chun met them at Luna Station with a small staff and professional court. Tessirana noticed that Chun looked older and tired. "Thank you for seeing us," Marana began formally. "We come to request humanity's assistance in defending Council space against the Dravast threat." Chun nodded and gestured for them to follow her to a conference room. The room was simple and functional without the elaborate decorations that council chambers typically featured. Chun sat across from the delegation and placed a data tablet on the table. "Before we discuss your request, I need to show you something," she said. The tablet projected a holographic timeline into the air above the table. It showed 112 years of human participation in council affairs. Year 2913. Chum began. Humanity joins the Galactic Council and proposes sharing our medical technology freely, and the Council forms a committee to study potential cultural contamination, and the committee takes 7 years to approve limited trials. The timeline advanced. Year 2925. Chun continued. Human military intelligence warns of energy signatures near the galactic core that match theoretical machine intelligence patterns, and the Council dismisses the report as warmongering and restricts human exploration in that region. More events appeared. Year 2931. Humanity proposes establishing a joint peacekeeping force to patrol the Outer Rim, and the Council approves but restricts human ship numbers to 20% of the total force, and then fails to fund the fund non-human portion, and humans end up providing 70% of the actual patrols while receiving 20% of the credit. The timeline kept advancing, year after year of human proposals being restricted or delayed or dismissed, year after year of human warnings being ignored, year after year of humans quietly doing the work that kept the Council functioning, while Council politicians took credit and complained about human influence. Arena watched and felt ashamed. Year 2987. Chun said quietly, "The Council passes the Territorial Restriction Act, limiting human settlement to 68 designated systems, and humanity's government begins seriously discussing withdrawal." Year 2998. The Council passes the military limitation treaty capping human fleet strength at levels below what we need to defend our own borders, and the Security Committee argues that humans are too aggressive and need external oversight. Chun paused the timeline. Year 3025, humanity quietly withdraws from all council institutions, and nobody asks why, and most species celebrate our departure. She turned off the projection and looked at each delegation member in turn. We gave you 112 years of good faith, she said with steel in her voice. We protected your trade routes, and we responded to your emergencies, and we maintained your infrastructure. And we warned you about threats, and you thanked us by restricting us at every turn. The Kryn representative spoke up nervously. Ambassador Chun, we acknowledge that mistakes were made, but surely the threat to all galactic civilization outweighs past grievances. Chun shook her head. You do not understand, she said firmly. This is not about grievances, and this is not about revenge, and humanity is not angry with you. Then what is it about? Marana asked. We are done, Chun replied simply. Done being taken for granted and done sacrificing our people for civilizations that treated us with contempt, and done accepting restrictions while doing more than our share of the work. She stood and walked to the window overlooking Earth. The Secretary General has authorized me to present humanity's position. Chun continued. We will defend our borders, and we will defend our allies, and we will accept refugees from any species, and we will trade with anyone who approaches us respectfully. But we will not return to the Council, and we will not send our ships to die defending species that voted to limit our fleet strength, and we will not send our people to rebuild infrastructure in territories controlled by the Vrexian hegemony. The delegation sat in stunned silence. The Veshan representative finally spoke. Ambassador Chun, my people are starving, and our worlds are under threat, and without human assistance, millions will die. Chun turned back to face them. Then I suggest you contact the Urith clans or the Kenrim Republic in exile, she said. Both species are part of the new compact, and both maintain food production capacity. The Kenrim Republic was destroyed by the Vrexians. Marana protested. The Kenrim Republic was evacuated to human space with our assistance, Chun corrected. They have established new colonies in the Kepler sector, and they remember who helped them when they needed it. She returned to her seat. Let me be absolutely clear, Chun continued. Humanity is not condemning you to die, and we will provide humanitarian assistance through the compact, and we will accept refugees regardless of their species, but we will not put ourselves under council authority again. You want US to join this compact? The Kryn representative asked. We want you to respect us as equals, Chun replied. The compact is open to any species willing to treat its members with dignity and honor their commitments and contribute their fair share. What about the Vrexians? Marana asked bitterly. Will you accept them too? Chun's expression hardened. The Vrexian hegemony committed acts of conquest against our allies, and the leadership will be held accountable, but individual Vrexians who reject their government's actions are welcome to seek refuge. She pulled up another display showing the Compact's current membership, humanity, and the Kenrin Republic and the Urith clans plus 6 smaller species that had broken away from the Councilate. Was not a large alliance, but Marana could see that it was unified in ways the Council had never been. You have built something new, she said quietly. We have built something based on mutual respect, Chun corrected. The Council was built on bureaucracy and politics, and the assumption that humanity would always be there to fill the gaps. She stood again, signaling the meeting was ending. Take our offer back to your governments, and they can decide if they want to join us as equals or continue trying to survive on their own. The delegation returned to their ship, and silent Marana looked back at Earth and the defensive platforms and the warships. Humanity had not just left the Council. They had prepared for this exact scenario. They had known the Council would fail, and they had built something better. And They had done it quietly without gloating or demanding recognition, just like they had done everything else. The delegation ship departed Sol system behind them. Humanity continued building its new future ahead of them. The council continued its slow collapse, and in the darkness between stars, the Dravask continued their inexorable advance. 5 years after humanity's quiet withdrawal, Marana stood on the observation deck of Compact Station Alpha and watched supply ships arrive with relief for the latest wave of refugees. The station orbited a beautiful green world in the Kepler sector that had been terraformed by human engineers over the past 3 decades. It was now home to over 2 million refugees from a dozen different species, including nearly 40,000 Thessians. Marana's own people had finally abandoned their pride. After the Dravask claimed their homeworld, the Thessian government that had hidden food shortages and rejected human help had collapsed in chaos. What remained of the Thessian collective had petitioned to join the Compact. The petition had been accepted. After significant debate, not all Compact members trusted the Thessians. The Kennarans in particular remembered that Thessia had voted against intervening when the Rexians invaded their territory, but humanity had argued for acceptance, and in the Compact, humanity's voice carried weight earned through consistent reliability. Marana now served as the Thessian representative to the Compact Assembly. It was humbling work. The Assembly operated on principles very different from the old council. Every member contributed resources based on their capability. Every member had equal voting rights, regardless of size or power. Every member was expected to honor their commitments. Species that failed to meet their obligations were given assistance to improve. Species that refused to improve were expelled. It was simple and effective, and based on mutual respect rather than political maneuvering. Maris assistant approached with a data tablet. The latest casualty reports from Council Space, she said quietly. Marana took the tablet and read through the grim statistics. 37 systems lost to the Dravask in the past year. Estimated civilian casualties approaching 2 billion. The Council's remaining fleet down to fewer than 300 operational ships. She had stopped feeling satisfaction at the Council's suffering. There was only sadness now for all the lives that could have been saved. The Dravask advance had finally been halted, not through Council action, but through Compact intervention. Human battle groups had established a defensive line at the Meridian Barrier. Line held because human ships were designed specifically to fight machine intelligent CMP weapons that disrupted Dravask coordination, adaptive shielding that countered their directed energy weapons, quantum encrypted communications that could not be intercepted, and most importantly, tactics that assumed the enemy would adapt and plan 3 moves ahead. The Compact had offered to extend the defensive line to protect remaining Council worlds. The price was simple: any species under Compact protection had to accept Compact governance. Several species had accepted. The Kryn collective had joined after their final homeworld came under attack. The Zentari clans were unified and petitioned for membership. Even some Vrexians had broken away from the hegemony and requested refugee status. The Vrexian hegemony itself had finally collapsed. The Council of Rex had died when his flagship was destroyed. Trying to flee the Dravask, species he had led into conquest were now scattered and leaderless. Some former hegemony worlds had fallen to the Dravaskos, had descended into civil war. Few had managed to establish stable governments and were cautiously approaching the Compact. Marana had been part of the delegation that reviewed their petitions. It had been difficult to separate her anger at what the hegemony had done from the reality that most Vrexians had simply followed orders. The Compact had established war crimes tribunals to address the worst offenders, but it had also accepted thousands of ordinary Vrexians who just wanted peace. The Kendaran representatives had argued most strongly for mercy. They had suffered under Vrexian occupation, but they understood that cycles of revenge would only create more suffering. Marana respected them deeply for that wisdom. The old Council still technically existed, but it was a shadow. Only 4 species still participated, and they governed. A mere 18 systems. They sent occasional requests for compact assistance. The requests were evaluated on humanitarian merit politics. Did not enter the equation. If civilians needed help, the compact provided it. If governments wanted power, the compact declined it was a principle that Marana had struggled with initially. She had spent her entire career thinking in terms of political advantage and strategic positioning. The compact's approach seemed naive, but she had learned that it was actually more sophisticated than council politics. By refusing to play power games, the compact had built trust species. Joined because they wanted to, not because they were coerced or bribed. And once they joined, they stayed because the system actually worked. Marana's thoughts were interrupted by an announcement. Secretary General Chun was arriving for the quarterly assembly meeting. Marana made her way to the main chamber. The assembly hall was modest. Compared to the old council chambers, no gilded decorations or elaborate seating arrangements, just a circular room with equal seating for all representatives. Chun entered looking older than when Marana had first met her 5 years ago. The weight of leadership had marked her, but there was also peace in her expression. That had not been there during the bitter final years in the council. The assembly meeting covered routine business budget, allocations and trade agreements and infrastructure projects. Marana presented Dish's latest contribution report. Her people were finally producing surplus food again with human agricultural assistance. They were also training doctors to staff compact medical facilities. It was not enough to repay what humanity had given them, but it was honest work, and the compact valued that. After the formal business concluded, Chun requested a moment to address the assembly. 5 years ago, humanity withdrew from the Galactic Council. She began. We did so because we were tired of being taken for granted and tired of doing more than our share, while accepting less than our due respect. She looked around the chamber at the representatives from 24 species. What we built instead is imperfect and small compared to what the council was at its height, but it is built on something the council never had, which is genuine mutual respect and shared sacrifice. I want to thank every species here for honoring their commitments, and for treating each other as equals, and for proving that galactic civilization can function without exploitation or contempt. The assembly responded with varied expressions of appreciation. Each species had their own cultural equivalent of applause. Chun continued, I also want to address the situation in former council space, and the secretary's office has completed our analysis of the Dravask threat. The room grew quiet. The Dravask expansion has stopped at the Meridian barrier, and our intelligence suggests they are not attempting to breach it, and instead, they appear to be consolidating control over the systems they have already claimed. Marana felt relief wash over her. Does this mean the threat is over? The Kenderan representative asked. No. Chun replied firmly. It means the Dravask have achieved their immediate objectives, and they now control approximately 60 systems in the galactic core region. Our analysis suggests they are ancient defense systems that were activated by unauthorized intrusion into their territory, and they have established a buffer zone and will likely remain dormant unless provoked. The Kryn representative spoke up. The council science station that was destroyed was studying ancient ruins, and perhaps that was the provocation. Chun nodded. Our Zen archaeologists believe the Dravask are guardian systems left by the precursor civilization, and their purpose is to protect something in the deep core. The council's mistake was treating them as a conquest opportunity rather than respecting the boundary they were designed to enforce. She pulled up a star map showing the new galactic order. The compact's position is clear, and we will maintain the Meridian barrier, but we will not attempt to reclaim systems the Dravask control and species that lost homeworlds to the Dravask are welcome in compact space. We will not repeat the council's error of assuming we have the right to go anywhere and do anything. Marana thought about the 17 warnings That human intelligence had filed warnings about machine activity in the core warnings that nobody had taken seriously. If the council had listened, they could have established a proper boundary and avoided the entire disaster, but the council had been too arrogant to listen. The meeting concluded, and representatives dispersed to their office. Myrana returned to hers and found a message waiting. It was from Ambassador Chen requesting a private meeting. They met in a small garden on the station's residential level. Real plants grown in real soil, which was a luxury most stations could not afford. I wanted to thank you personally, Chen said. You were one of the few council members who tried to do the right thing. Myrana shook her head. I did not try hard enough, and I spent too many years going along with policies I knew were wrong. You also wrote The Cost of Contempt, which has become required reading for young compact diplomats. Chen pointed out Myrana's report had been published 3 years ago. It had caused significant controversy. Some called it a necessary accounting of failure. Others called it Deshin's self-hatred. Narana considered it simply the truth. Do you think we have learned anything? She asked. Chen considered the question carefully. Some have learned and some have not, and some will never accept that they were wrong. But the younger generation growing up in the compact will know a different way. She gestured at the garden around the asterisk.